Today I'm going to talk to you about how to make homemade pasta dough. Now in a previous video I talked about different types of pasta, different types of flour to make pasta dough, and how those flours impact the properties of the dough. If you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend you check it out, and we'll put a link down in the description below. But for me, I love to make homemade pasta because one, it's really easy to do. It doesn't require a lot of ingredients, and it's relatively simple. Another reason is that making homemade pasta is going to give you a far superior product to anything you're going to buy in the store. It's just something that's, for such a simple recipe, it really improves the quality, and you can just blow people away by doing it. Another reason I like to make homemade pasta is because it's a good introduction to dough making. So if you're interested in learning how to make doughs, I highly recommend you learn how to make pasta dough first, then learn how to make pizza dough, and then learn how to make bread dough. Because the big difference between pasta dough and bread doughs and pizza doughs is there's no yeast. And anybody that makes bread will tell you that once you introduce yeast into the equation, it makes everything a million times harder. So pasta dough is a great introduction for people that want to start learning how to make dough, and it's a good beginner step before you start working on pizzas and bread. My name's Chef Jeremy with Lineage Culinary, and today we're going to make homemade pasta dough. So before we make our dough, I want to talk to you about baker's percentage. To understand dough, it's useful to think about the relationship of flour to the other ingredients, and that's where baker's percentage can be very helpful. Using baker's percentages, every ingredient in a dough is measured, and all ingredients are expressed as a percentage of the weight of the flour. Why does this matter? The key here is that the ingredients are expressed as a percentage of the weight of the flour, not a percentage of the weight of the total dough. It gives you an easy way to reference how the other ingredients relate to the main ingredient in all dough, which is flour. Using baker's percentages, you can easily see if something has more or less water, egg, yolk, salt, etc. compared to the flour. This is helpful as you learn to adjust and develop your own recipes. To use baker's percentages, you're going to need a digital gram scale. I have one here. These are super inexpensive and easily found online. By weighing everything in grams and working in increments of 100 grams of flour, you can do baker's math really easily. Okay, as you can see, I've got my gram scale here, and that's tared out to 0. And I've got two types of flour. I've got my 00 flour, and I've got some semolina flour. I'm gonna make a pappardelle here, so I want a nice stretchy, elastic pasta, so I'm gonna use mostly 00 flour made out of bread flour. I'm gonna put a little bit of semolina to give it a little bit of sturdiness. And I want to start with, when I'm doing a pappardelle or a string pasta like a fettuccine or a tagliatelle, I like to go 20% semolina. So I'm going to start, I'm doing 200 grams of flour, so 10% of that is 20 grams, 20% of that is 40 grams. So I'm going to start with 40 grams of semolina. Now I'm going to do the rest up to 200 grams of my 00 flour. Okay, so now I'm going to add my liquid. Now I want a 63% hydration dough. So all of my liquids, my egg yolks, my egg whites, and my water, all that is going to combine to be my hydration. So 63% for 100 grams times 2, because it's 200 grams, is going to be 126 grams. So I'm going to start with my egg yolks, and I like to do 1 yolk per every 100 gram. There's 1. There's 2. I'm at 38 grams here. Now I'm going to go 1 whole egg. That brings me up to 93. And now I'm just going to add water to get to that 126. Here's some water. And again, I'm just going to bring this up to 126 grams. Close. And there we go. And look, if this is confusing and you're like, hey, I can't ever remember that, don't worry about it. I'll put a recipe in the description, and I also have a recipe on lineageculinary.com. But 63% is where I like to go for a pappardelle pasta dough. Now I like to sift my flour. Makes it easier to work with. So I like to put it in a pasta screen and just shake it out into my surface. Take my bench scraper and get that into a nice good pile. And now you take your hand like this and do a little bird's beak and get you a nice little circle in the center there. This is where I'm going to add our liquids. Now you want to come through with a fork, break up those yolks, and just start whipping that together. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of hitting the edges to drag a little bit of that flour in as I stir. You can see my eggs are starting to get a little thicker. So I'm kind of going around the sides like that. Just keep that going. And that will start to thicken as that flour gets incorporated. See how silky that is? That's what I'm looking for there. Now you can see my dough is my yolks are starting to come together here. Now I'm gonna go ahead and give up on this fork. Just scrape that off, and get my dough knife in here and start folding things in. Okay, now my dough is nice and shaggy, and I'm gonna start putting it together into a nice dough ball. And look, if you want, you can do this in a bowl, but you know, I like to do it the traditional method, and that's what you're seeing right here. Okay, now I'm gonna start kneading my dough, and what I'm doing here is I'm folding over and pushing, over and pushing. See how I'm kind of pushing over in this way? And I'm gonna keep doing this, and this is gonna take a while, so I won't film the whole thing because that will get quite boring. But you don't want to skip the time here. This is gonna take a while, and what you may be inclined to do is to think, oh, my dough is too dry. At this stage, you might want to add some liquids. I would say do not do that yet. Hold on to this. Continue to knead for at least 8 minutes to about 10 minutes before you make a decision to add any flour or water. Because it takes time for that gluten to relax and those gluten structures to form and for the flour to get hydrated by those liquids. And that's what we're doing here. This kneading method that I'm doing, where I'm pushing over and pushing and pushing and then folding and pushing, that's stretching out the gluten network. Okay, now I've been kneading for at least 8 minutes, and you can see that my dough, it's not really that smooth. So I know that I need to add a little bit of water. Now, if the dough is too sticky, I would add a little bit of flour. But it doesn't take much, so I'm just gonna dip my hands in a little bit of water and incorporate that into my dough. And again, back to the same kneading motion that I was doing before, maybe a touch more. The nice thing about pasta dough is if I get a little too wet, I can always add some flour. If I get a little too dry, I can always add some water. Now this feels like it's coming together nicely, so I'm gonna keep kneading this. Again, it's gonna take some time because I need to form those gluten networks, so you have to be patient. You know, I like to put on a little bit of soft music and just, you know, use this as sort of a meditative practice and just relax and, you know, enjoy the process of making handmade pasta. This isn't something you wanna rush. If you wanna do this with a dough hook or a food processor, you absolutely can, but I think for me it's just much more enjoyable of a process, and it's better to learn this way. And then once you know how to do it by hand, then it's a lot easier to be able to make pasta dough with the mechanical attachments. Okay, now I feel like my dough's in a good spot. I can see it's nice and smooth here. Now it's important to let dough rest. You've got to let dough rest. It's critical. So I'm gonna wrap this with plastic and let it sit at room temperature for 30 minutes minimum so that that gluten has time to relax. Right now it's really, really tight. I need those strands and those gluten networks to relax a little bit. Now our dough is rested and it's ready to be rolled. Just like I recommend that you learn to hand knead your dough, I also recommend you learn how to hand roll it. There are tabletop sheeters with a hand crank and those work well. There are also mixer attachments that work really well and those will sheet lots of pasta in a quick period of time. But I recommend learning to do it by hand, not only because it's a good way to learn, but also because the quality of your pasta is going to be better when you do it by hand. Those sheeters tend to push out all the air and flatten it a little bit too much. When you do it by hand with wood, it leaves a little bit of air in there and gives the dough some texture, and it's just going to create a pasta dough that you're not going to get by doing it mechanically. So if you're making pasta at home, unless you're trying to serve a lot of people, you might as well finish it off by hand anyways. But again, I'd say learn by hand, and then if you're doing a giant dinner party for 50 people, maybe you want to use a sheeter. So now I've got a nice large wooden working surface here, and I've got my dough. I'm going to go ahead and unwrap that. Take my bench scraper, I'm going to cut this in half so it's easier to work with, and I'm going to keep this wrapped so it doesn't dry out. Now I want to shape this with my hands so that it's circular, so I don't, I'm working with an even object here. And press this down. Now this surface has been floured lightly with some all-purpose flour, and I use all-purpose just because it's a lower cost flour versus the expensive semolina and 00 that I use to make the pasta. Just kind of pressing that out by hand. A little flour on top there. I'm going to take my wooden dowel, my pappardelle, and I'm going to start pushing this out. And while I'm doing this is I'm continuing to turn the pasta so that it maintains an even shape. I want to keep this as much as a circle as I can. And as it starts to stick to the wood, I'll add a little bit more flour. You don't want to overdo it on the flour because you want it to stick a little bit. Now there are two motions I'm doing here. The first is Bordeaux, and that's placing your dowel in the center and moving it up and back, up and back. Now I turn my dough slightly in the center, up and back. As this starts to get bigger, I'll start to move my hands around the dowel to get even pressure. Again, this is called Bordeaux. One more time, in the center, up to the front, and then down to the back. And this pasta is called a sfoglia. Now the other motion, this was called Bordeaux, now the other motion is called rouleau. Now I want to take my pasta, I want to roll it up, and kind of push it out like that. Roll it up on the pin and push it out. And that really helps those edges get thinned out. And now I'm going to alternate between Bordeaux and rouleau until my sfoglia is a nice, big, and even, thin circle of pasta. Now this might look like it's taking a while, and it does. This takes a while, but as you can see, it's getting flattened out at a slow pace. I'm not smashing the dough. And I'm keeping the integrity of the dough, and there's still some air structure inside that dough, and that's the benefit of rolling this by hand. And it does take a little while, but I promise you it's worth it. So you can see my sfolia is nice and thin. And when I'm ready to go ahead and cut this, again, I'm going to make this into pappardelle. So this is probably the easiest shape of pasta you can make. What you want to do is start down here on one end and roll this up loosely to about the center of the circle. I'm going to take the other end, roll that so that it meets in the center. Now pappardelle is about an inch, so I'm going to trim the edges here, and I'm going to come through with a nice sharp knife and make my cuts. Now, to unravel this, I'm going to put my knife up underneath and let the pasta unravel just like that. One more time, let that pasta unravel. Tilt it, pull those strands, and there's my pappardelle. So I did 200 grams, so this is about 100 grams here, and that's easily enough for one person for an entree. And I'll do the same exact thing with the other portion of pasta that I haven't rolled out yet, and I've got a nice pappardelle pasta for easily for 2 people, maybe even 3. And that's how to make fresh pasta dough. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit like and subscribe. My name's Chef Jeremy with Lineage Culinary, and thank you for watching.